I moved to Canada from Singapore a little over 4 years ago. Yet, lately, I keep hearing and seeing on the news that more and more people are deciding to leave the country. Why is everybody deciding to leave? In this video, I'm going to break out the 7 key reasons which I think are the reasons why these people are deciding to leave the country, and also add my spin on it as someone who is somehow living this experience. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Fabi, and on this channel I share stories about my non-linear life journey to encourage you to embrace your own journey and feel less alone in the process. In this video, I'm going to talk about the current emigration trend or outflow of residents in Canada that is such a hot topic in the country. I will start with some context on where I'm coming from, and then we'll dive right into the 7 key reasons that I just mentioned. So I moved to Canada from Singapore in 2019, so it's just been a little over 4 years now. Yet over the last year, I keep hearing and seeing on the news that more and more people, including both Canadians and immigrants, are deciding to leave the country. And this includes the people that I know. Canada is a country that relies on skilled immigrants to drive its population and economic growth. Yet, according to Stat Canada or Statistic Canada, in Q3 2023, the country saw a spike in terms of reverse immigration or emigration or outflow of residents, in which Canadians fled the country for a new home. It's such a large number. The only 3 other times that the government has seen such a large number in the last 73 years was in 2016, 1967, and 1965. Even though the country is seeing a record number in immigration growth this year, the number of study permit application actually declined by 20% in September, according to a website called betterdwelling.com. This is a record low since the pandemic. The rate of immigrants leaving Canada, suggesting that newcomers and immigrants might not see the benefits of settling in Canada. And this is based on the study for immigrant retention that was conducted by the Institute for Canadian Citizenship and the Conference Board of Canada. So that is the lay of the land in terms of what's going on here in Canada. And now let's delve into the 7 key reasons of why I believe are the reasons why these people are deciding to leave Canada for a new country. Before we get started, I wanted to put a disclaimer that the purpose of this video is not to discourage you from moving to Canada, neither is it to encourage you from leaving the country. I'm not taking a side here. The purpose of this video is me sharing the general sentiment that the public has on this trend, and also me sharing my personal perspective as someone who's been living in the country for close to 5 years. The first one is high taxes. Canada is pretty well known for its high taxes. For me personally, I live in BC, and the average income tax in BC is about 28%. When I go out to buy stuff, I'll get taxed for GST, which is a government tax, and provincial tax. Most provinces have tax except for Alberta. I used to live in Alberta and can confirm that Alberta only has GST and not the provincial tax. To put things into perspective, for me personally, I used to fly as a flight attendant with Singapore Airlines before I quit in 2019 and moved to Canada to pursue my master's degree. So fast forward to 2023, an MBA later, plus 3 extra years of professional experience, I earn less than what I used to earn when I was working as a flight attendant with Singapore Airlines. And also, I have a management job. I work for a large Canadian company here in Vancouver. So I do think that the residents living here can really feel the pinch from the high taxes. Number 2 is limited career opportunity. For this one, I think it's twofold. I'm going to start with a point that's most applicable to immigrants and newcomers in Canada, and then I'm going to move on to the second point, which I think is applicable to residents of Canada regardless of your status in general. First off, for immigrants and newcomers who are new to Canada, when you want to look for a job, a lot of employers expect you to have Canadian experience to begin with. However, when you're new to the country, there's no way you could have had some Canadian experience, correct? So it's sort of like a chicken and egg situation. In order for you to be considered by a Canadian employer, you would have to have a Canadian experience already. But how can you have a Canadian experience to begin with if no employers want to even consider you without any Canadian experience? So this results in a lot of newcomers and immigrants having to take jobs that are not in line with their career interests their skills or even their qualifications. Many people would have to take an entry-level job or even a service job or a more physically demanding job, which is not something that they anticipated when they first packed their life away and moved to Canada. On one side, I kind of understand where the employers are coming from. To them, it doesn't really matter if you have the technical skills to do the job, but do you know how to do things the Canadian way? I personally feel that there is a lot of unwritten rules in terms of how you should collaborate and communicate with one another in the Canadian work environment, and you can only learn those things once you are in the environment itself. I do think that this is like a cultural thing in terms of how things are done in Canada versus different parts of the world, and it might be something that's applicable no matter where you move in the world. So I kind of understand the employer's perspective in a way, but I do think that there is a gap in terms of how the government assesses and qualifies immigrants and newcomers to come to Canada, and what makes them qualify to come to Canada at the first place, and then the reality that they have to face in the job market once they're here. By the way, if this is something that rings a bell to you, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and also maybe let me know what would be the best way to kind of alleviate this issue. For me personally, because I did my master's degree in Canada, I sort of got exposed to the Canadian way of doing things and how the society operates, so that kind of helped me assimilate to the culture here. Plus, because I used to work as a flight attendant with Singapore Airlines for 4 years, that also got me exposed to a diverse group of people from all over the world, so it wasn't like a whole new world to me, even though interacting with different cultures for a quick moment like when I was flying is a completely different experience as compared to living in a new country. When it comes to career opportunities, what I've been experiencing is that there is less opportunities as compared to obviously the south of the border, aka the US, or even Asia. I think it has something to do with the population size, which I think directly impacts the total addressable market that any businesses can address locally. Plus, I think inflation has also been hitting the country pretty hard, so that also kind of impacts the purchasing power of the people living in the country. That's been my personal experience, but I would love to know what you've been experiencing if you live in Canada, so let me know in the comment section down below. Number 3 is rise in crime and homelessness. According to an article written by CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, homicides rate in Canada in 2022 was the highest in 30 years. And this is based on the data pulled from StatCan or Statistics Canada. The homicide rate is considered a key indicator when we talk about the state of violence in any country. The homicide rate rose by nearly 8% in 2022, and that brings us to 2.25 for every 100,000 population in Canada. I don't think we have the 2023 data yet. I couldn't find it, but if anyone knows or manages to somehow find out, let me know in the comment section down below, because I genuinely would love to know where we're sitting with this. Now, zooming in to the situation in Vancouver, where I live, I also keep seeing and hearing a random act of attacks, and at one point I became worried. It was just so random and things got so creepy at one point. For example, just last month in November, a 34-year-old man was stabbed to death in downtown Vancouver. I was like, what is happening? And then the month before that, in October, there was also another random stabbing incident, also in downtown. Yeah, these random incidents actually make the residents feel very anxious. Because of this, in October, a bunch of BC activists who are part of a group called Save the Streets call for an anti-crime strategy to help solution this, claiming that there is a crime wave sweeping this western province, and this makes a lot of residents feel anxious, and they even are afraid to get out of the house because they don't know what's going to happen. Citizens are also living in fear because of the drug crisis, which I'm going to talk about shortly, as well as the homelessness. There is a drug crisis in Canada alone, and according to CBC, in 2022, more than 7,300 Canadians died of apparent opioid overdoses. In BC alone, according to the stats on the City of Vancouver website, more than 21,000 people in BC have lost their lives due to drug problems since 2016, which is the year where they declared a state of emergency when it comes to drug problems in the province. The reason of the emergency declaration that happened in 2016 was driven by an increased deaths caused by opioid overdoses. Speaking from my personal experience, in Vancouver, there is this area called Downtown East Side, or DTES, where you would see more drug junkies and homeless people walking past that area at times. To put this into perspective, when I go to downtown, I will have to pass by that area, and then I've seen countless ambulances in that area. Plus, on that street, which is a major street in Vancouver, the speed limit just for that stretch is 30 kilometers per hour, whereas normally the speed limit is 60 kilometers per hour. Why? Because there's just a lot of homeless people wandering around the area. Okay friends, now that we're halfway to the video, if you find this video useful or insightful in any way, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, because that would help an independent creator like myself a lot, and I appreciate the support. Okay, moving on to the fourth point, which is high cost of living that's disproportionate to income. According to jobylico.com, an average Canadian earns about $63,000 a year, and that is gross income. If we calculate the average income tax that we have to pay, say 28%, based on the calculation that we did when we talked about high taxes in the first point, that would bring us to $45,360 a year, which equals to $3,780 a month. Now, let's look at the rent price, which usually takes up the biggest portion of someone's living expenses, unless you have a mortgage, but we're not gonna talk about mortgage because that looks different to everyone, so we're just gonna stick to rent price. According to rental.ca, as of September 2023, the rent price of a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver costs a whopping $3,000, whereas in Toronto, it costs about $2,500. I would say that this disproportion is particularly true for big cities such as Toronto and Vancouver. If we look at other cities such as Calgary or Edmonton, for example, the place where I used to live, it's actually not as bad. In Calgary, a one-bedroom apartment would cost about $1,700, and in Edmonton, it would cost close to $1,300. Whoa, heaven. Number 5 is housing crisis and its affordability. According to an article published by the Global News on November 1st, 2023, it was reported that Canada is seeing a deterioration in their housing market in Q3 of 2023. And I've done some research and a lot of readings on this particular trend, and to put it simply, it is primarily caused by an imbalance between supply and demand. Demand is way higher because of how Canada has been seeing a record population growth over the last year, and this is pushing market prices to go up, and there's not enough supply to cater to the demand that Canada has created as a result of the immigration influx. And this is applicable to both renting and buying space, especially in big cities such as Toronto and Vancouver. On top of that, according to a business owner in the mortgage space, this imbalance also creates stricter assessment when it comes to approving any mortgage application. My personal take on this is I think that the country has a population growth target that they are trying to meet, which is totally fair. Where I think might be missing is the readiness piece. They also have to make sure that they drive enough supply after increasing the demand through an inflow of immigration. So I think there might be a gap here when it comes to readiness, which I am hoping that the government will be addressing it soon. Number 6 is the government. I don't want to get into the Canadian political landscape too much because I'm not necessarily passionate about this, but I wanted to speak about something that has personally impacted me, and that is about the Bill C-18, or the Online News Act. First of all, let's start with context. Let's start with what this Bill C-18 is all about. So Bill C-18 requires media outlets to pay the Canadian news outlet some sort of compensation to give access to Newslink to Canadian viewers, or something that's called link tax. The law passed in June this year. So now let's move on to what actually happened to me and how this impacted me. Last month in November, one of my videos got picked up by a Singaporean media outlet, and this is a screenshot of it, and they posted a link to the article that they wrote about my video on their Facebook page. So obviously I would want to know what they wrote and how the coverage is performing and stuff like that. I first came to know about this coverage from my friend who sent me a screenshot and asked me, hey, did you know about this? And I was like, hell no. I naturally would want to know because that was my first ever earned media in my entire life when it comes to my personal creative production. But I wasn't able to view the link on Facebook because it's blocked. Honestly, initially it threw me off a little bit, like why? And then I remember about this BLC 18 thing, and then I'm like, okay, this is why I'm not able to view this. And that's a little bit of a bummer, I will say, from my personal perspective. I would have loved to follow along in terms of how the coverage is going and the number of shares and things like that. Last but not least is challenge in making friends. First of all, I find people are generally polite here and try to be politically correct, which is a totally fair game. And maybe before I go too far, maybe let me first ask anybody here who has experience with this, or anybody living in Canada or even Canadians, is this a West Coast thing? Or is this a Canadian thing? This is something that I've been wanting to know. For me personally, I went to school in Alberta, and then after I graduated, I got a full-time job, and then I moved to Vancouver. While working in Vancouver, I still have a lot of colleagues located in Toronto. I've also been to Toronto myself, and I do see the difference between Toronto and Vancouver when it comes to the openness and the friendliness, and I feel that Toronto is even more multicultural, and people tend to blend in regardless of what you look like, your skin color, your race, and stuff like that. And this is just me sharing my personal perspective and just me being honest. Okay friends, that is all I have for today's video. To recap, we talked about the reasons why people are deciding to leave Canada, and we first started with the context on where I'm coming from, and then we delved into the 7 key reasons which I believe are causing people to leave the country. And those reasons are 1, high taxes, 2, limited career opportunity, 3, rising crime and homelessness, 4, cost of living, 5, housing price and its affordability, 6, the government, and 7th, challenge in making friends. On this channel, I've been talking a lot about my flying journey with arguably the best airline in the world, and in my subsequent videos, I'll be talking about living abroad, including my life in Canada, and why I decided to move here. So if you want to follow along, make sure that you hit the subscribe button. Okay, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. I hope you find this video useful. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye now.